So, something we hear all the time as math teachers is to make the math relevant. But, like, what does that even mean? Right? Is it about careers? Is it about budgeting? Is it about making something fun? Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Relevance isn't just those things. It's the way, way deeper than that. And it might be the missing link between your students and the math that's happening in your classroom. Hey, guys, welcome to the Modern Math Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Moore. And on this episode of Poolside PD, we're talking about one of our favorite educational buzzwords in math, relevance. So, we're going to talk about what relevance looks like in the math classroom, why it's essential, and how to build it into your lessons from the very beginning. So, if you're up for it, let's do this. All right, you guys, let's talk about what relevance really means in math class. First up, relevance does not equal fun or entertaining. Relevance is about purpose. Okay. So, this isn't just highly entertaining and for engagement purposes, it is for the purpose of giving your students a sense of purpose. Okay. So, when something feels relevant to any of us, really, as humans, but in general, for students, it's going to be like, oh, okay, like this actually matters to me, right? I get why we're doing this, or okay, this connects to something in my world. We've all been there at different PDs and things where we're like, why am I even here? None of this matters to me. And that's what we want to avoid our students feeling like. We need to give them some sense of purpose and belonging in the classroom for what they're doing there in math class. Maybe not every single second of every single day. Goodness knows they're not going to need to use the quadratic formula over and over again. But in general, every unit, every time we are studying a new topic, we need to make sure that students have something in there that helps it feel relevant to them and help it say, like, okay, I get this. I get why this is happening. Now, here's a couple of misconceptions about relevance and some like kind of just overarching things people reach for because they think it's going to be like, oh, obviously, right? So, budgeting. Budgeting is an amazing real world skill, but depending on your students and their ages, it's really not all that relevant to them. Okay. You've really got to think about what you're going to do with that. So, for example, if my son has, oh gosh, what are they called? V-Bucks, right? My youngest has V-Bucks. He's got a certain number of points or whatever it is that he gets to use for it. He's got to budget how much of that he uses on different things. Okay. So that's more relevant to him than trying to plan a birthday party. He just knows mom throws him a birthday party. He doesn't need to know the other details. Okay. So budgeting in inside the scope and realm of what your students are interested in and what's age appropriate for them, that can definitely be relevant. But just in general, as a blanket statement, like check yourself. Okay. All right. Next up, a lot of people want to talk about the math in careers. That's awesome. I want you to expose students to the fact that all sorts of careers use different levels of mathematics, different levels, different types, different amounts. They engage in mathematical thinking and reasoning differently. Okay. But a lot of times it's too abstract or too far away or doesn't necessarily hit the desires of the students in your classroom. So while we do want to expose them to the fact that a variety of careers use a variety of math skills, we can't just rely on that alone and saying, you know, that they're going to use it at some point in their life because maybe they aren't going to go and become an accountant, or they're not going to go and become I don't know, CEO of a company. I need to know these things, right? So I want you to remember that relevance is not just adding a real world context or a real world problem to a worksheet. Real matters. Absolutely. I want these things to be real for your students, but relevance also matters. Okay. And there's different ways that we can make something relevant and different spheres of relevancy that are going to connect to your students. So I want to break that down for you, what we mean when we say relevant. So, at like a base level, there is some conceptual relevance. So, helping your students see like the why of the mathematics, making it feel coherent, connected, not just like a bunch of steps to memorize. So, making that relevant connection to a topic they learned in the past, a topic in another course that they might see it in. If we're studying data, you could connect it to, census data for their history class. You could connect it to a whole bunch of things in science. So, like getting that conceptual relevance that, like, this matters outside of just math. This is how it connects to other topics inside and outside of math. Okay. Then we also have practical relevance. So that is things that we are like teaching our students the skills that they're going to use in life. But like we need to make it now, not like 10 years from now, because they don't care about their life 10 years from now. Their life 10 years from now is going to be so drastically different than what we thought our lives were going to be like 10 years from now when we were 16. You know what I'm saying? Right? I'm 36 now. When I was 26, I did not imagine this world. Right? When I was 16, I did not imagine that world that we would be in right now. Artificial intelligence? Are you kidding me? A worldwide pandemic? No. Okay. So we still want to teach them these skills, right? But we need to make sure that it is in their world at this moment. Okay. So if you're doing like some data modeling or analysis, make sure you're using like real data, current prices, things like that, and keep it within the context of what your students know and understand. So with this, like I've talked about the systems of equations and giving constraints. All of your students, hopefully, at some point, have like gone to, like a McDonald's, or they've gone to the cafeteria and they've gotten that delicious warm cookie and an ice cold Coke or pop or whatever it is that you call it wherever you are. It's pop here in Michigan. So all my students are going to go grab a pop and a cookie and they know they have $5. We can figure that budget out. Okay. We can talk about the practical skills that they need to figure out how many cookies they can buy if they need to get one Diet Coke for them and one Diet Coke for Miss Moore. Okay, so we can talk about those things, right? Practical relevance. Then there are the broader spheres of relevance that make it personal to the student. And this is where it's really most powerful. So, this is where you're going to tie into your students' lives, their interests, their identities. And this is why having student surveys and using the data from those student surveys at the beginning of the year is so, so, so important. You need to understand your students' interests and aspirations if you're going to create those meaningful experiences for them that are going to hook and engage them. So, when I'm talking about spheres of personal relevance, I am talking about connected to the self, connected to their community, connected to the pop culture or society, and then connected to the world at large. So, as you are in the center of that circle, if you're looking at me on YouTube, I'm doing this with my hands. So, at the center of that circle is self. That is something that is inherently connected to your students' interests or aspirations. Maybe this is happening in your warm-ups, in your class discussions, in your word problems that you're creating for your students, in a project that's tied to the sports or music or games or whatever it is that they are interested in. Okay, connected most closely to themselves. Then we've got their community. So if you have different events that happen in your community a lot, for example, we have Howell Melon Fest here, which is a festival all about melons, just like you would imagine. I can make connections to that Melon Fest because that is something in my community that my students all have an experience with, right? They've got a lived experience with what that is. Okay. It's not quite as close as like their own personal hobby, but it's still something in their backyard. Then we've got the idea of like pop culture and society at large. So, talking about things like trends on TikTok and like back when the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge first came around, although I know it just came around for a victory lap because my kids did it at our house on Easter. And then outside of that, connecting to the broader world. So, this is, honestly, we were doing the Going Viral project when the pandemic hit. So we had to shut that project down because that had way too close of context for the real world project. But in general, now we can look back at it and use that as like, hey, this was a global phenomenon. And let's talk about how these diseases spread. Let's make that connection now. Okay. So those are the different types of relevance. Again, you've got conceptual relevance, connecting it to all the different topics and things that they're studying, practical relevance, like the skills that they're going to actually need to use and starting to get them practice with those, and then personal relevance somewhere in that sphere of relevancy. Okay. Those kinds of activities are going to be what keep your students engaged and invested. All right. So there are some easy ways you can start building relevance in your class today. You can start really small and you can look at like some real world data sets from your local area. Maybe you're comparing gas prices. I know like that's on the mind of a lot of my 16-year-old students. You can talk about different TikTok stats. You can talk about, like your local home baseball team and what their scores are, like go Tigers, right? You can do some would you rather math questions where you're incorporating some of those interests that your students have. Um, and just having that lively discussion, fostering that natural conversation in there. You could also do some student created survey projects. This is super fun. If you are doing a data unit, having your students create a survey about what they're interested in knowing about their student population and like going out and giving this survey and then collecting and analyzing the results. Super cool, right? You could also do some like localized math tasks. Maybe you guys have a garden at your school and you're like, you know what, let's overhaul this. And so you have your geometry kids go out, take the measurements, reimagine the design, and then they get a little bit of budgeting worked in there and they get to go and make the actual garden happen, right? So something cool like that, whether it's at school or somewhere in the community or anything along those lines. Okay. You can also use different thinking routines, like which one doesn't belong or like indifferent with real world graphs, which is super cool. There's lots of great data sets online that you can use to have a conversation about things that are real in and happening right then in the world, which is super fun. Okay. So I just want to encourage you that you don't need like a full project to build in this relevance. One question can spark that shift. One moment, one anchor activity, one anything. Okay. You can start small and finish strong. So if you're thinking like, okay, I get this, but like, how the heck do I start it? That's where the project or practice expert guide is going to come in. So inside the guide, which you can get in the show notes here, you're going to learn whether a topic is more suited for practice and like skill and drill kind of things, or if it's suited for applications. And that's where you can say like, okay, how can I start building in relevance to these two types of units? If it's more apt towards a project and real world relevance, you're going to have a lot of opportunity there to naturally build it in. If it is a topic that is more closely tied to like procedural skills and understanding, you're going to have to work a little bit harder. So I want you to make sure that you've got your best brain on. Go use your favorite AI tool or hit me up in the DMs. I'm happy to help you with that. Okay. So you're going to see how you can align these relevant concepts to what you're already teaching. So make sure that you go and grab that guide here. It's been super helpful for planning, especially if you've got a new prep and you're just not sure. Top 10 topics. I've got it for pre-algebra, algebra 1, algebra 2, and geometry. So you're all set there. All right, you guys. So remember, what makes math class feel relevant? We want all of our students to feel like the math matters, okay? But what does relevant even mean in the classroom? Remember, it is not just about adding real world problems to a worksheet or doing a budget project once in a year. We talked about what relevance really looks like today and why it's critical to student engagement. And you, my friends, are ready to start engaging your students with it in your math class right away. All right, you guys, that's it for this episode of Poolside PD. Make sure you get the project or practice guide so you can start planning out your units and building in that intentional, relevant connection for them. If you have any questions, hit me up in the DMs. I'm at More Than Just X. And until next time, keep it real.